Okay, there is going to be feedback, so I gotta turn it down on this thing. Okay, that should be okay. Just making sure this is correct. Why, yes it is. Okay, works for me. On Discord. I don't want the thing muffling my own, like the sound of my own voice, so it's, for me to do voices, be a little bit easier to do. Alright, hello and welcome to the streaming Parson reads The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, compiled by Howard Pyle. I think that's how you say that. And what I have here is the version of the great illustrated classics these were a series of books. I actually have a bunch of these. Great illustrated classics, and they're the kind of books that like you give to like a third grader to like get them into reading much longer books. Back when I was in, you know, school, and you know, obviously this was before like, you know, something like Harry Potter was around. Yeah, I'm that old, but I think I actually credit a lot of my reading skill to actually being exposed to great illustrated classics, which are like that intermediary between, excuse me, the great intermediary between, you know, reading short, simpler, you know, stories and reading full-on like chapter books, basically. Now I know, like, I wasn't the smartest kid growing up, so I kind of really needed the help, where I wouldn't have been able to like read a full chapter book by like the time I was in the 5th grade. Something like that would have been hard for me if it wasn't for stuff like this. Because, you know, when I look back at like probably my first or second grade, and my reading levels were pretty low, and so it's like, okay, you know, Michael's kind of falling behind. How do you know, get him to read much more intensive stories? And of course, part of it is not just like the length of books, but also like one of the tricky things, and this is one of those challenges in the modern education system in general. It's not easy to do, but you know, how to get boys to read longer books that aren't just like adventure stories, right? But you can have these half-illustrated adventure stories, but still give them that larger depth of chapter books. And so I think these books are really good. I have like quite a few of these. I have like a Robin Hood, I have Ivanhoe, and I have a King Arthur one. And not only were these books helpful in reading, you know, increasing my reading skills when I was really young, but another thing that these books really did for me was that it really made me have a lot of interest in stuff like the Middle Ages. And for those of you that know me, the Middle Ages is something like I'm a huge history buff in that regard. Well, that time period, so I wouldn't be like a real history buff, because some people would say like, well, a real history buff would be like all kinds of history. But I mean, this obviously, my passion for medieval studies would have like obviously have me be inspired for other kinds of history as well, like ancient civilizations and stuff like that. But if I were to pick like my favorite time period to study, the worst thing, commercials, real professional, right? Okay, okay, this might not work then. Whoops. What I'm hoping is that like I could just have a channel play music for me without having constant commercials. Not that, you know, because obviously I don't make money for this, so that shouldn't matter. But, you know, just so we don't break the flow of things. Sorry about that. But anyway, for those of you that know me, I'm a huge, like, medieval studies buff. I really like this kind of stuff. And, you know, reading stuff like Robin Hood, Ivanhoe, and whatever, in like the 3rd grade really got me into it. And I mean, that does explain some things like today, right? Like, my favorite kind of video games are those medieval fantasies, huge Lord of the Rings fan and stuff like that, because of stuff like this. And so today, kind of do like a, hey, reading some medieval classics, if you will, right? And so that's what we're going to be doing today. And I'm going to be doing this for the next little while. It's just what I want to do. As long as I'm doing this 5 days a week thing for streaming, is I want to have a reading some kind of medieval literature just because I love doing it. And I like to expose, you know, some of you that may not have read a lot of these kind of books or, you know, a lot of medieval literature. Maybe I can pique up your interest in medieval literature and medieval studies, because this is the kind of stuff I actually really like. So maybe I'll inspire some of you. That's my hope anyway. So that I'll do this once a week, and then of course I'll go back to playing Tokyo Mirage tomorrow and Wednesday. Thursday's Throwback Thursday, of course, once again to inspire you to check out older games. And then, of course, Friday I'll have my Bible reading stream. That's kind of the plan for the week. But enough chitter chatter. It is 3:02, and today we are reading The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle. So the neat thing about these great illustrated books is that, like, they're shorter chapter books, because even though the book itself has like 200 some odd pages, actually almost half of them are like illustrations, and the illustrations are actually pretty good, especially for its time. So I'll definitely try and remember to show you every illustration, which is like every page basically. So, and unlike my Bible reading ones, there won't be a lot of commentary. This is more like me just having you guys listen to a great medieval classic, really. And so, but if you have questions or anything like that, you know, just shoot them in the comments and I will get to them. But this is more just a time for me to hopefully inspire you into medieval literature, because I love this kind of stuff. And you know, if I can inspire people to love this kind of stuff too, that would just make me so happy, right? So anyway, here we go. Chapter 1. Robin Hood becomes an outlaw. So here's a picture of Robin Hood and his merry band. And this is what I mean. Every chapter, or every page basically, every other page, is going to have an illustration like this. And these are pretty cool. The real question is how I'm going to be able to show this to you well, because one, my microphone is blocking me. And my camera quality is only okay, but here you go. Because when I do this, I can't see, right? Because I always see them, unless I go like this and peek my head over. So there you go. That's the first picture. It's just Robin Hood sitting around with his buddies. In merry England, in olden times, when good King Henry ruled the land, there lived in the green glades of Sherwood Forest, near Nottingham, a famous outlaw named Robin Hood. No archer ever lived who could shoot an arrow with such skill, and there never were such yeomen as his merry band of 150 men. All the band were outlaws, yet the country people loved them. No one who came to Jolly Robin for help ever went away with an empty hand. But Robin wasn't always an outlaw. This story will tell you how he became one. When Robin was 18, with a strong body and bold heart, the Sheriff of Nottingham proclaimed a shooting match. A large bale of ale would go to the best shot with a bow and arrow. When Robin heard of the match, he said, I will go too, and draw my string, not only for the barrel, but for the win of the smile of Maid Marian as well. The month was May, and flowers covered the meadow. Apple buds blossomed, and the cuckoo and lark could be heard in the hedge. The air was sweet, and Robin whistled as he thought of Maid Marian. As he walked through the forest at dawn, Robin suddenly came upon 15 of the king's foresters seated beneath a great oak. Each man was dressed in bright green, or Lincoln green as it was called. They made a fine show, feasting on meat pies, foaming with ale. And here's a picture of these guys. It's not colored, but you can just imagine these guys are wearing like green on top of their armor. And here they are, you know, just having drinks, eating some meat pies, you know, stuff like that. So there they are. Now one of these men, with his mouth full, called out to Robin, "Hello! Where are you going, my lad, with your bow and arrows?" When Robin told them he was off to Nottingham to shoot for the prize, they all laughed aloud. They called him a boasting infant and told him he had no chance of winning. That made Robin angry, for no lad likes to be teased. He boldly made a bet that he could bring down the best in a herd of deer more than 60 yards away. He took his good strong bow made of yew wood, and placing the tip at his instep, he strung it. He fitted a broad arrow onto the string and raised the bow, drawing back the gray goose feather to his ear. The next moment, the bowstring rang, and the arrow sped like a hawk in the wind, killing the deer dead. So here's a picture of Robin Hood. He's aiming at some deer. I should probably show this for like 10 seconds. Just hold it up like this. If there's any interesting details in the picture, I will try my best to point it out. But here you go. Robin aiming at some deer. Ha! Cried Robin with a hand on his hip. How do you like that shot, good fellows? All the foresters were filled with rage, for they had lost their bet. Not only that, Robin had killed one of the king's deer that was in their care. When the foresters did not answer, Robin looked at them grimly, turned on his heel, and strode away. His heart was bitter and angry. They had teased him, made a false bet with him, and cheated him. Now it would have been well if the fellow who had first spoken had left Robin alone. But he was drunk and angry about the lost bet. Suddenly, and without a warning, he sprang to his feet and sent an arrow whistling after Robin. The arrow buzzed within 3 inches of Robin's head. Quickly he turned around and cried, "You said I was no archer, but say so now again?" Robin sent an arrow in return, and the forester fell with a cry. Before the others could move, Robin had disappeared into the forest. So here's the picture of the guy shooting at Robin. It's a pretty cool picture. I like this one. It's neatly drawn. There's the guy all the way at the top there. As Robin ran through the greenwood, all the joys and brightness. It's happening again. Okay, I'm not gonna use music in the background if that's gonna keep happening. Maybe I should just download some music or something to use. But of course, it's hard to have music play for 3 hours. Whatever, I don't need it. And YouTube is getting silly with putting ads on every kind of video. Even ones with oh, this is just for public consumption and not used for any monetization. But nope, gotta slap ads on it because YouTube's gotta make money off you regardless. Anyway, as Robin ran through the greenwood, all the joy and brightness were gone from Robin's life. His heart was sick with sadness because he had killed a man. And so he came to live in the forest that was to be his home for many years to come, for he had become an outlaw. The sheriff of Nottingham swore that he would bring Robin Hood to justice, not only because he wanted the 200-pound reward for Robin's capture, but also because the dead forester was related to him. But Robin Hood stayed hidden in Sherwood Forest for 1 year, gathering around him many other outlaws like himself. Some were wanted for hunting and killing the king's deer in cold winter, when they had no food. Some had been taxed so heavily that they had no money to live. And some had been turned out of their farms so that their land might be added to the king's property in Sherwood Forest. So here's a picture of Robin Hood running in the forest after he had just killed the forester. Just gotta check something quick. Okay. Sorry, sometimes my sentence reading can be a little disjointed because I forget that, like, not every page ends on a period. And so sometimes I have to read to the next part and then, like, break consistency. But, oh well. All had come to escape the unfair treatment they had been given at the hands of the king. During that year, over 100 strong yeomen gathered about Robin Hood, and they chose him to be their leader and chief. They missed no chance to take from the rich and the proud who had ruined them. To the poor folk, they lent a helping hand and returned the money that had been unjustly taken from them. The people found they had nothing to fear from Robin and his outlaw band, so they began to tell many tales of the merry men of Sherwood Forest. These are the tales that I will tell you now. Okay. And here's a picture of a bunch of dudes hanging around in a tavern. And it's storytelling time, basically, is what these guys are up to. So that's kind of how you're supposed to treat every chapter. It's just like, just pretend that we're a bunch of dudes in a tavern, and I'm just telling you stories of Robin Hood. That's kind of how you're supposed to treat this, and I think this picture captures that pretty well. That being said, I'm just going to take a sip of this water, because I don't have beer with me, and I definitely wouldn't be drinking on stream. One, because I probably have to drink so much that I die halfway through the stream. That's just starters. I'm pretty low tolerance for alcohol in my system. I'm weak sauce like that, but you can have a glass of beer while you listen to me read Robin Hood stories if that is how you fancy. So here we go. Chapter 2. Robin Hood meets Little John. Here's a picture of, I guess, a bunch, Robin Hood and a couple of his guys, and just washing their face in the nearby brook. Because that's what people did in medieval times. Because, you know, running water wasn't a real thing. You know, that wasn't provided by nature. This picture of Robin Hood and his buddies. Just, you know, washing their faces. Now one morning, when all the birds were singing among the leaves, Robin and all his men awoke. Each fellow washed his head and hands in the cold brown brook that leapt laughing from stone to stone. Then Robin announced, "Today I go to seek adventure. Wait here in the greenwood, my merry men. I shall blow 3 blasts upon my bugle horn if I need you. Then come quickly, for I shall want your aid." He walked to the edge of Sherwood and wandered for a long time through highway and byway. And he had met many people. A fair lady, a fat monk, a gallant knight, a plump lass, But he found no adventure. At last, Robin came to a narrow bridge made of one log laid across a pebbly stream. There was room enough for only one person to cross. Then he saw a tall stranger coming from the other side. Each man walked faster, thinking to cross first. "Now stand back," shouted Robin, "and let the better man cross first." "No," answered the stranger. "Stand back yourself, for I am the better man." Then Robin and the stranger began to boast at each other. Robin was tall, but the stranger was taller by a head, for he was 7 feet tall. The man was also much broader than Robin. Even so, it was not long before Robin challenged him to a bout, with staffs on the bridge. The first man to fall would tumble into the water. And here's a picture of Robin Hood challenging the tall stranger. And there's the log that only one person could pass up at a time. "I'll gladly wait while you cut a stick to use as a staff," said the stranger, laughing and twirling his own staff till it whistled in the air above his head. I don't need this now. Let's move this over here. The knights of King Arthur's Round Table never met in a fiercer fight than these two. Robin and the stranger stood face to face on the bridge for 1 good hour. Many blows were given and received, till here and there were bumps and sore bones on both. Each man marveled at the other's strength. Then the stranger gave Robin a crack on the head. Robin lost his temper and swung with all his might at the stranger. But the man caught him off balance, and Robin fell head over heels into the water. "And where are you now, good lad?" shouted the stranger, roaring with laughter. "Ha ha 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 ha!" There he is. Robin Hood in the water, and this giant stranger laughing at him. "Oh, floating with the tide," said Robin, laughing at himself. He waded to the bank, frightened and scattering the little fish with his splashing. Then he clapped his horn to his lips and blew a blast that echoed sweetly down the forest path. "I must say you are a sturdy soul and a strong fighter." "And you," the stranger said, laughing, "you take your beatings bravely." Soon the twigs and branches rustled, and suddenly 20 or 30 of Robin's strong yeomen, all dressed in Lincoln green, burst from the forest, with Will Stutely leading them. When they heard that this stranger had given their chief a good dunking, they moved to treat him the same. But the stranger was so strong, he held them off, and more than one yeoman got a bruised head. Robin asked the stranger to join his band, and the man replied, "If there is any man here who can shoot a better arrow than I might." There's a picture of all the guys coming out, surrounding the giant. The stranger chose the strongest bow next to Robin's own, and sent an arrow so straight that it hit the very center of the mark made on an oak tree, about 80 yards away. Even Robin's own men clapped enthusiastically at such a fine shot. "Aha!" cried the stranger. "Do better if you can." Robin took up his bow and shot with the very greatest skill. The arrow flew straight, and it split the stranger's arrows into splinters. The yeomen leapt to their feet, waved their caps, and cheered. "That is a shot indeed!" Oh, sorry. I totally did the voice wrong. That's supposed to be "That is a shot indeed!" cried the stranger. "Now, I will be one of your men. I am called John Little." Then Will Stutely, who loved a good joke, spoke up.
"No, stranger, I do not like your name, so I will change it. You are so small and frail. I think I will call you Little John."
With that, Will and before I read the next part, here's a picture of the iconic Robin Hood scene. If you watch any Robin Hood movie, it will have this scene where Robin splits an arrow with one of his own arrows. Of course, there have been many scientific videos trying to see if this is actually possible, which I think it's not. I think that's the conclusion because of how aerodynamics work and how arrows actually travel in the air. But that's besides the point. This moment here is supposed to be this iconic moment in Robin Hood lore. Whatever version of Robin Hood you read, this is a famous scene where Robin shoots an arrow so well, he splits another arrow in half. So there you go. That is a shot indeed. And with that, Will emptied a pot of ale over the stranger's head and christened him Little John. While Robin Hood and all his band laughed aloud, at first Little John was angry, but he soon found he could not stay angry for long because the others were so merry. So he laughed with the rest. Then Robin clothed them from top to toe in Lincoln green and gave him a good yew-bow. Little John was now a member of Robin Hood's merry band. And here's a picture of Will Stutely pouring some ale onto Little John's head. Oh, sorry. Just gotta turn that off for a bit. And it better not leave me this long-winded message. Anyway, Chapter 3. The Tinker joins Robin's band. The Sheriff of Nottingham had sworn to capture Robin Hood and collect the £200 reward. But the sheriff did not know about Robin's band, and he thought he could serve a warrant for his arrest on Robin, just as he would on any other lawbreaker, with the help of the citizens of the town. But the men of Nottingham town knew of Robin and his doings, and many laughed when they thought of anyone handing the bold outlaw a warrant. They knew that all they would get would be a cracked head. So not one of them offered to serve the sheriff's warrant. After his failure in Nottingham town, the sheriff sent a messenger to Banbury town. There the messenger found a shaggy-haired tinker, a metal worker, who thought he could easily capture this rascal Robin Hood. I totally forgot to show the picture of, here's the Sheriff of Nottingham, and he's making his warrant for the capture of Robin Hood. One bright morning soon after this, Robin started off to Nottingham to find out what was happening there. He walked merrily, and his eyes and thoughts wandered. His bugle horn hung at his hip, and his bow and arrows at his back. In his hand he carried an oaken staff, which he twirled with his fingers as he strolled along. As he strolled down a shady lane, Robin saw a tinker coming. The tinker's bag and his hammer hung on his back, and he carried a strong staff and sang in a loud voice. So here's a picture of, there's said tinker right here. And he's walking and singing, and Robin Hood's just kind of waiting on the path, just kind of chilling. Robin gave him a saucy greeting, and soon the two were joking and heading to the Blue Boar Inn for some home-brewed ale. So, some local craft. That's always good. "Tell me your news, friend," said Robin, "for tinkers are always full of tales." "I have a task that calls for all my wits. I seek a bold outlaw who men call Robin Hood. In my pouch I have a warrant with the sheriff's red seal on it. Do you know this Robin Hood, good fellow?" "I saw him just this morning," said Robin. "But, tinker, men say he is a sly fox. Be careful, or he might steal your warrant right from your very pouch." "He may be sly, but I am sly too," cried the tinker. "What does the man look like, lad?" "Oh, much like me," said Robin. "My age, height, and build. He has blue eyes like mine, too." And Robin winked at him. "I thought he was a great bearded man," said the tinker. "Not so large," said Robin, "but men say he's a right good fighter." Here's a picture of Robin and the tinker, and they're walking along, heading toward the Blue Boar Inn. With this, they entered the Blue Boar Inn. No sweeter inn could be found, shaded and cool in the summer, cozy and full of good company in the winter. The inn was well known to Robin and his band. He and Little John, or Will Stutely, or young David of Doncaster often gathered there when the forest was filled with snow. The innkeeper knew when to keep quiet, and when Robin and the tinker entered, he made no sign to give Robin away. Now Robin made sure that the tinker drank deeply, while he only wet his lips. First the man sang, then his head began wagging, until at last he fell asleep. Then Robin laughed aloud, and quickly took the warrant from the tinker and disappeared. Here's a picture of Robin Hood taking that warrant after the tinker has passed out from a drink too many. I like the little detail of like the two cups just on the table. The next day, at a sudden bend in the road, Robin and the tinker met sharply face to face. "Halloa, my sweet bird," said Robin. The tinker was grim. Not only had he been left to pay the bill for the ale, but he now knew that it was Robin Hood himself who had tricked him. He spat upon his hands and came at Robin with his staff. Robin was quick and moved like a cat, but his staff broke under the tinker's mighty blows. Robin reached for his horn and blew 3 blasts, loud and clear. "Blow if you will," said the tinker, "but you will go to the sheriff with me." Then Little John and 6 burly yeomen in Lincoln green leapt out of the forest. Why do you blow your horn so loudly, good master?" cried Little John. "This tinker would like to take me to Nottingham to hang." He shall hang," cried Little John, and he began to tie the tinker's hands with his bowstring. "No," said Robin, holding Little... I guess I'll read that. "No," said Robin, holding Little John's arm. "He is a good man, and brave, too. And he sings a lovely ballad." Here's a picture of Robin reaching for his horn after the tinker broke his staff. So Robin looked at the tinker and asked, "Will you join my men? You shall have 3 suits of Lincoln green and 40 marks a year." The tinker agreed to the merry life, and they all headed back into the forest depths, where the tinker was to live forever, singing ballads to Robin's band. Here's a little picture of Robin stopping Little John from tying up the tinker. Chapter 4. The Nottingham Shooting Match. Now the sheriff was very angry when his plan failed. He swore he would hang the tinker as a traitor if he ever caught him. He spoke to no one, and no one spoke to him, for he spent all his time alone, thinking of a plan to take Robin. Finally, he found one that couldn't fail. He decided to proclaim a great shooting match and offer a prize so grand that daring Robin would risk a day among the sheriff's men to show his skill. The sheriff planned to surround him before he could escape. Oh, here's a picture of the sheriff pacing around, thinking about a big plan to capture Robin Hood. So there's the sheriff of Nottingham. So the sheriff of Nottingham sent messengers north, south, east, and west, announcing this match. The prize was to be an arrow of pure gold. Robin Hood first heard the news in Lincoln town. He hurried back to Sherwood and called to his men. "Our friend the sheriff of Nottingham has proclaimed a shooting match. I would like one of us to win the golden arrow. What say you, lads? Young David of Doncaster spoke. I have come from our friend Edom of the Blue Boar Inn. He tells me that this knave sheriff is laying a trap for you at this shooting match. So do not good, go master, for I know he seeks to harm you. Now, said Robin, you just keep your ears open and your mouth shut, as a wise and crafty woodsman should. No, good David, we shall not be afraid of the sheriff. We will meet his tricks with our own tricks. Some of us will dress as friars, and some as tinkers, and some as beggars. And I will go too and shoot for this golden arrow. And if I win it, we will hang it in our greenwood tree. So here's a picture of basically the guys are having, Robin and his men are having a meeting. And this is supposed to be David Doncaster warning Robin with my Porky Pig stutter voice, but a bad attempt at it. The day of the Nottingham shooting match was a colorful jumble of ribbons, flower garlands, silk banners, bells, ale, tents, and food carts. Every seat on the benches surrounding the shooting range was taken. The sheriff leaned forward in his place and looked keenly among the archers for Robin Hood. But there was no one dressed in the Lincoln green that he and his band wore. After the first 2 rounds, only 3 of all the strong and famous archers gathered that day were left. One was Gil o' the Redcap, one Adam o' the Dell, and one a tattered stranger in scarlet with a patch over one eye. Of these men, only the stranger was near Robin Hood's height and build. But his hair and beard were brown, not yellow as Robin's, and he was blind in one eye. So here's the day of the shooting match. Not quite as grandeur as the book describes it, but hey, when you only have this much space to draw in, you make with what you got, right? The people laughed when the tattered stranger stepped forward to shoot, for they thought no man could aim with only one eye. They were silenced when his arrow flew so true it hit the target's center. What is your name? Asked the sheriff, as he came down to award the golden arrow. Men call me Jack of Teviotdale, said the stranger. I believe that you draw a better bow than that coward Robin Hood, who dared not come today. Will you join my service? No, said the man to the sheriff. No man is my master. It was a strange company that gathered around the greenwood tree in Sherwood that day. Oh, I should show the picture first. So here's a picture of the sheriff giving the stranger with the eye patch the golden arrow. And I love how the golden arrow is just kind of depicted with like a little force field looking thing that's supposed to be like a black and white drawing of like its glow. I mean, to be fair, an arrow made out of pure gold would glow, right? Like, especially in the sunlight, gold would glow. That's kind of how it goes, right? So They just kind of animate, like, the arrow looks like it has a force field. But there you go. The stranger wins the golden arrow. I love how the book kind of spoils it. I mean, if you haven't figured out already, this guy's obviously Robin Hood. But, I like how the book just says, like, Robin wins the golden arrow. It was a strange company that gathered around the greenwood tree in Sherwood that day. Among tinkers, friars, beggars, and farmers, there sat one man in tattered scarlet, with a patch over one eye. In his hand he held a golden arrow. As the others talked and laughed, he stripped away the patch and the rags and showed himself all clothed in Lincoln green. These clothes come off easily, but this walnut stain will stay in my yellow hair for a while. For it was Robin himself who had taken the prize from the sheriff's own hands. After a feast, Robin took Little John aside and said, "I do not like the sheriff thinking I am a coward." Little John winked at Robin and said, Will Stutely and I will soon send that fat sheriff news he does not expect." The sheriff's dinner in the great hall of his castle was interrupted by a blunted arrow that suddenly flew into the room and landed among the dishes on the table. Tied around the shaft of the arrow was a fine scroll. Oh, I should show this picture. It's a picture of Robin Hood lifting up the eye patch and holding the golden arrow. One of the sheriff's men pulled the arrow out of the table, unrolled the scroll, and read, "Now heaven bless thy grace this day, say all the men in Sherwood, for you just gave the prize away to merry Robin Hood." "Where did this come from?" cried the sheriff angrily. "Through the window, your grace," said the man who had taken the arrow from the table. There's a picture of the sheriff and that knight, or one of his guys, I guess. They're reading the little scroll with Robin's message. The sheriff looks super angry, as anyone would be, I'm sure. Chapter 5. A Daring Rescue. When the sheriff failed to take Robin by law and tricks, he tried might. He ordered 300 men to Sherwood Forest to capture the outlaw, dead or alive, for a reward of 100 pounds of silver. When Robin heard of the sheriff's plan, he said, "Force brings blood. I killed a man once, and I do not wish to kill a man again." So his band stayed hidden in the depths of the forest for 7 days. And for 7 days, the sheriff's men hunted through the forest, but did not see one man in Lincoln Green. Oh, I should show the picture before I forget. So, here's a picture of, I guess, one of Robin's guys, or maybe Robin Hood himself. And he sees, a bunch of the sheriff's men looking through the forest. Early in the morning of the 8th day, Robin said to his men, "Now, who will go and find where the sheriff's men are by this time?" Every man leaped at the chance, but Robin chose Will Stutely, saying he was the slyest old fox in Sherwood. Will dressed himself in a friar's robe and hid a great sword beneath it. As he set off for the Blue Boar Inn, he said to himself,
Good Anna will tell me all the news.
because that's the voice Will Stutely has from now on. At the sign of the Blue Boar, he found a band of the sheriff's men drinking noisily. Without a word to anyone, for he feared his voice might be recognized, he sat down in a corner and waited to speak to the innkeeper alone. As he sat, a large house cat rubbed against his knee, raising his robe a bit. Here you can see said house cat. At the bottom there, and there's Will Stutely spying on some of the sheriff's men. But I mean, you gotta know what's gonna happen next, right? Like the cat rubs against his knee. Stutely quickly pushed his robe down again, but one of the sheriff's men had already seen the Lincoln green beneath his robe. Meanwhile, Robin Hood was standing under the greenwood tree, thinking of Will Stutely and how he might be. When he saw two of his men running down the path with Macon, or Makin, it's spelled M-A-K-E-N. I've always pronounced it Macon, but a friend of mine tried to correct me and say it's pronounced Makin. But you can decide how this name is pronounced. Makin, the innkeeper's, or Macon, the innkeeper's daughter. Will Stutely has been captured, she cried, and I fear he is hurt badly. They say he will hang in Nottingham tomorrow. He shall not, cried Robin, and he blew 3 loud blasts on his horn. Tomorrow I will bring Will Stutely back, or I will die with him. And all the band agreed. Next day they all made their way from Sherwood by separate paths to meet in a dell outside of Nottingham. Robin sent young David Doncaster to learn the place and hour set for the hanging. Here's a picture of Macon with, coming to tell Robin Hood that Will Stutely has been captured. Robin then called the band around him and said, "We go straight to town and mix with the people there. Keep one another in sight. Strike no man without need, but if you do strike, strike hard. Then keep all together until we get back to Sherwood. Let no man leave his fellows." There was a bustle in Nottingham, and crowds filled the streets, knowing that the famous Will Stutely was to be hanged. In the midst of the sheriff's guard, tied in a cart, rode Will. His face was pale, and his hair was matted with blood from his wounds. He looked up and down the crowds as he passed. Some faces showed pity, and some showed friendliness. But when he saw no one that he knew, his face sank. He remembered the forest, the wild deer, and the laughter of his friends. He looked upon death as a sad thing, and he bowed his head. And there's poor Will Stutely, and he's he's really sad that he won't get to see his friends anymore. Then came a bustle and a noise, and a man tried to push between the guards to reach the cart. When Will Stutely saw that it was Little John, his heart leapt, for Robin's band was on every side of him. Little John struck a guard full on the head and leapt into the cart. "You will not leave us without saying goodbye, Will," he said, cutting Will's bonds. Swords flashed in the setting sun, and a soar of arrows whistled through the air. The sheriff rode down on Little John, but he ducked quickly, and the blow passed harmlessly over his head. Robin Hood and his band pushed the guards back, sending a stream of arrows after them as they ran. "Stay!"
Stay!
shouted Will to the sheriff.
You will never catch bold Robin Hood if you don't meet him face to face.
Then Will Stutely turned to Little John, and tears ran from his eyes.
My old true friend, I thought I would see you next in heaven.
And he cried. Little John could not answer. He was weeping also. Here's a picture of Little John saving Will. Then Robin Hood gathered his band together with Will Stutely in their midst, and they moved slowly toward Sherwood. But they left 10 of the sheriff's men lying on the ground wounded. Thus the sheriff tried 3 times to take Robin Hood, and had failed 3 times. His warrant failed, his trap failed, and his army in Sherwood failed. This last time frightened him, for he came near to losing his own life. So he stayed in his castle many days, ashamed of what had happened in Sherwood that day. And here's a picture of those guys wounded lying in the forest, as Robin Hood and his men retreat into Sherwood Forest. Chapter 6. Robin Hood's Revenge. The band lived quietly in the forest for nearly a year, shooting, wrestling, and singing merrily. In that time, Robin often thought of ways to even his score with the sheriff. One day he got so impatient that he decided to go to Nottingham to see what adventure he could stir up. On the way, he met a butcher heading for the Nottingham market. Robin had a fancy to enter the town in disguise, so he bought the man's cart, horse, clothes, and all his meat for 6 marks. Okay, so I might as well clear out what a mark is, because you have pounds, which is the weight of wealth, but a mark was typically how we understand, like, banknotes, basically. Because, yes, that was a thing even in the Middle Ages. A mark was kind of more like a banknote. Now, The problem with a mark, as opposed to, well, why using gold as currency was a big thing in the Middle Ages, was that a mark, similar to how we use cash in a country, a mark is only good in certain parts of, England in this case, right? And so, considering how big England is, and I mean, today we have it divided as the United Kingdom, right? And so you have like Wales and all those other places, right? Oxford and all those places. And basically how marks would work is that a mark was only good in a certain region. So, let's use a modern analogy of like, the UK. And so you might have a mark that's good for, the county of Wales, but the mark would only be good in Wales. However, its value was actually equivalent to that of pounds of silver. Of course, pounds of gold would always be the highest value, and it still is to this day, right? Well, gold isn't the most valuable thing now, but gold is still extremely valuable, and gold by the pound is, or technically, we value gold in troy ounces, not necessarily in pounds like they did back then. But I mean, a troy ounce of gold is still pretty valuable. I think gold goes for like $800 per troy ounce, give roughly. A troy ounce is, well, a troy ounce today is way more than how gold would have been treated back then. But of course, pounds of gold in the Middle Ages was treated as extremely valuable. A mark would have been equivalent to a piece of silver, but a mark would only have been good in certain regions. So the town of Nottingham would have been part of a larger county. I can't remember which county. I mean, it's obviously the one with King Henry. So near London, basically, or what is now modern day London. And so in that region of England is where the mark would have been valuable. And then if you went to Scotland, you would need a different kind of mark. Of course, when you think of like the Middle Ages, the reason why, people always value gold and silver a lot more is because that's kind of universal, right? It doesn't matter what part of England you're in, or even if you trade with another country, like Spain, right? Gold is always valuable in that regard, right? And of course, the way marks were treated was based on the value of silver and gold, because silver and gold could be used anywhere, but a mark could only be used in, whatever region these guys lived in. Basically, let's say London region, basically. And so, when Robin buys a cart of meat for 6 marks, it doesn't seem like it's a lot, because that's like, what, 6 pieces of silver, which isn't very much, especially for all that stuff he got, right? He got a horse for less than 6 silver, right? A whole cart of meat, and the guy's clothes, right? Of course, at the same time, and this is why, like, there was so much corruption, and I mean, it's not too indifferent from, the world today, right? So there were the few who had lots of money, and then there were the bulk of people who didn't have very much. And so even to a poor meat seller, 6 pieces of silver would have been considered a lot of money. And so even though in the grand scheme of things, 6 pieces of silver isn't very much, but to a guy who lives hand to mouth as a meat seller, 6 pieces of silver would have been a lot, right? And so it seems like the guy's not being given that much, but back then, 6 pieces of silver, or the equivalent of it, basically, would have been enough to sustain the guy for a while. And obviously, this meat seller would have had extra horses and extra carts, right? Because obviously, as running a small business or whatever, you would need you would need that little bit of extra just in case, right? Because the other thing that is not accounted for that people in the Middle Ages weren't stupid about was that they always needed backup plans, because thievery was a common thing. I mean, Robin Hood has this whole band of bandits, right? So people obviously knew that you don't just take all your, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. And so, sure, this guy probably had extra carts and extra horses or whatever, but to be able to sell what he had at that moment for 6 silver would have still been good enough. Even though in the grand scheme of things, 6 silver isn't very much. I mean, in contrast, when the bounty is put on Robin for 200 pounds of, I think it's 200 pounds of gold, like that makes him pretty valuable to capture, right? It's kind of weird how currency worked in the Middle Ages, but that's just kind of how they did things. Oh, here's a picture of Robin Hood and the meat market guy, the meat merchant. And he buys his cart and his horse and his clothes for 6 pieces of silver, or the equivalent of it. Maybe a little bit more than that, but it's not much. Just checking something here. Now in the market, he set up his stall and sold all his meat at low prices. When a widow or a poor woman came to him, he asked for no money. And when a merry lass came, he asked for only a kiss. Here is a picture of Robin Hood getting a kiss from some nice young lady. None of the other butchers sold a penny's worth of meat. Some were angry, but most thought of Robin as a jolly lad who had come into much money and wanted to live merrily until it ran out. "Come, brother," said one of the butchers. "This day the sheriff has asked all the members of the Butcher Guild to feast with him." Robin was delighted and immediately agreed. At the guild hall, the sheriff called Robin to sit by him, not recognizing him in his butcher's dress. The sheriff had heard that the jolly lad was rich and free with his money. Since the sheriff was greedy for money, the sheriff hoped to get some of Robin's into his own pocket. As dinner was served, the sheriff asked Robin to say grace. So Robin stood up and said, "Now heaven bless all of us this food, and may all butchers be as honest as I." At this all laughed and clapped. Now during the meal, Robin teased the sheriff and made jokes, laughing all the time. The sheriff wanted to know how rich this bold fellow was. My brothers and I have more than 500 deer, but we have not been able to sell any of them," answered Robin. Hearing this, the sheriff's eyes twinkled, and he offered Robin 300 pounds for them. Many of the butchers grumbled, saying it was a mean trick to cheat a poor youth. For the deer were well worth 700 pounds. And here's a picture of Robin Hood saying grace at the table. Although you don't see any food on the table, which is just weirdly animated. But I guess they didn't feel like drawing it. After all, the text did say that as dinner was served, right? So that means the food would have been on the table, or there would have been some butlers or something, bringing the food. But you don't see that, but whatever. But Robin had a plan. He accepted the 300 pounds and arranged to take the sheriff to see the herd that very day. As the two neared Sherwood, the sheriff grew worried, for he feared the outlaw band. Robin laughed. "Do not worry," he said, "for I know Robin Hood well, and you should worry about him only as much as you worry about me." Deeper in the forest shades, they crossed the path of a herd of grayish-brown deer. The sheriff nodded his head and moved to go, for he was uneasy, but Robin caught his bridle rein. "Stay," said Robin. "You have not met my brothers. They own these deer also." He blew 3 clear notes, and soon Little John came with 100 strong fellows. "Take this bridle, Little John," cried Robin, "for the sheriff has come to feast with us today." Here's a picture of Robin after calling Little John to, settle the sheriff's horse. And apparently the sheriff is going to feast with Robin Hood. Twice in the same day. The sheriff despaired, for he knew how the band feasted with rich men. Food and ale flowed merrily, and then the men emptied their guest's purse. And the sheriff's purse held 300 pounds. He wasn't any more pleased when he was led to an oak tree where the feast was laid out, for there hung the golden arrow Robin had won. Soon, though, the sheriff was eating and heartily cheering the men as they competed at games with staffs and bows and arrows. At one point, the sheriff didn't know that he was cheering for the very same tinker that he had sworn to hang. Here's a picture of them sitting under that tree with the golden arrow. And they must be watching some game, but you don't see the game. You just see the guys just cheering and having a grand old time. The time passed so merrily that the sheriff thought Robin had forgotten about his purse. But no, for when the sun was low and the moon glimmered in the trees, Robin sent Little John to count out the money. Then he thanked the sheriff and sent him on his way. "Farewell, sir," said Robin. "And if you ever plan to cheat some poor fellow again, remember your feast in Sherwood." Then the sheriff bitterly regretted the day he first mixed with Robin Hood. He thought he could cheat another man, but instead he was cheated himself. For it is true that many men are ruined by their own greed. So here's a picture of Robin Hood saying, "See you later. Hope you had a good time." And of course, yes, Robin did take his 200 pounds. Or 300 pounds of, I assume, gold. Which would pay all his guys the 40 marks a year he promised them. Apparently, because that's a fair amount of money, right? 40 marks a year. I'm just seeing how far in this book I am. Okay. So I'll probably stop it around like halfway through the book and then read the other half next week or something like that. Which means the stream won't be all that long. Because I'm already at chapter 7. The Nottingham Town Fair. Spring and summer had long passed, and the mellow month of October had come. Apples had ripened, harvests were gathered, and the air was cool and fresh. It was time for the great fair, which was held every 5 years at Nottingham Town. Archery had always been the main sport, but this year the sheriff hesitated to proclaim it, fearing that Robin Hood and his band might come. At last he decided to offer a prize they wouldn't want: 2 fat steers. Little John, Will Stutely, and young David of Doncaster had heard the news at the Blue Boar Inn. Oh, here's just a picture of the town of Nottingham in the distance. And just some kind of scenic view. Now Little John told Robin he wanted to go and shoot, but Robin had some doubts. "You are my right-hand man, and a strong fellow, Little John. Even if you are not as cunning as Will Stutely, I could not bear to lose you." "I will wear scarlet and hide my brown hair in a hood, and no one will know me," said Little John. So he clad himself in scarlet and set off to the fair. Many people on the road turned to look at the strong, tall fellow in scarlet, and he smiled and nodded back to them. First, he went to the drinking booth where beer and ale flowed, and called to all around him, to be merry and have a drink with him. Then he went to the dancing booth, where 3 men made sweet music with bagpipes. Here he laid down his bow and arrows, and leapt high, snapping his fingers, and charming the lasses with his dancing steps. Here's a picture of Little John, he's dancing. There's some nice ladies in the front of the panel here, and looking upon Little John's sick dance moves, I assume. After Little John had danced a long time, he strolled to the platform, where men battled with staffs. Now Little John loved a good bout, and what happened next is still sung about in ballads to this day. There was one fellow, an Eric O'Lincoln, who cracked the head of every man that met him in the ring. He stood to one side of the ring, boasting of his skill. When he spotted Little John, he called him a long-legged coward. Little John was tired of the man's boasting and wanted to teach him a lesson. "Is there a man here that will lend me a good strong staff, so I may try this fellow?" called Little John. At this 10 men offered their staffs, and Little John picked the heaviest one. He tossed it up onto the platform, leapt highly after it, and snatched it up in his hand again. Here's a picture of Eric O'Lincoln boasting at the crowd and challenging Little John to a stick fight. Those that stood around saw the bravest display of fighting with a staff ever seen in Nottingham. Little John and Eric O'Lincoln's bout. Sorry. Little John and Eric O'Lincoln bouted 3 full rounds, both guarding themselves so well that no blow was struck until the 3rd round. Then Little John rapped Eric's head. Before Eric could get his balance, Little John swung a blow so heavy, Eric fell as though he would never move again. This ended the famous bout. But now, the time had come for the longbow match, and a crowd followed Little John to the range. Although every man shot well, Little John was the best of all, and the crowd cheered him. Oh, here's a picture of Eric O'Lincoln lying on the ground, beaten after one good hit in the head, and the crowd following Little John to the shooting match, which, as I just read, he clearly won. "Hurrah for Reynold Greenleaf!" they cried, for this was the name Little John had called himself that day. And the sheriff stepped down from his raised seat and came to where the archers stood. He looked closely at Little John and said, "I think I have seen your face before." Perhaps, said Little John, "for I have often seen your worship." But the sheriff did not suspect who he was. Reynold Greenleaf, said the sheriff, "you are the best hand at the longbow I have ever seen, next to that knave Robin Hood. Would you join my service, good fellow? You would have good pay, 3 suits of clothes a year, and good food and ale." Little John agreed to this, for he thought he might find some merry jokes if he worked in the sheriff's house. Here's a picture of the sheriff making his offer to Little John to join his service. I like how it's already nighttime. You got the nice moon and the clouds in the background there. To celebrate his victory, Little John gave the steer he had won to the people around him. They built large fires and roasted the steers and drank ale. When the day faded and the moon rose over the spires and towers of Nottingham town, the people joined hands and danced. Around the fires they went skipping to the music of bagpipes and harps. By this time, the sheriff and his new servant, Reynold Greenleaf, were in the castle of Nottingham. I'll take a drink of water. I've been reading non-stop without it. Chapter 8. Life at the Sheriff's Castle. Little John first entered the sheriff's service as a joke. But the fireplace was warm in the winter, and he was the sheriff's right-hand man at the table and at hunting. So he put off from day to day going back to Sherwood, until 6 long months have passed, until he had grown as fat as an ox. Then one day when the sheriff went hunting, something happened which disrupted Little John's life. So here's a picture of Little John just eating apparently a plump turkey leg in the sheriff's castle. Living the good life. As you can see, the nice ornate cup here. And, you know, here's the turkey that he probably took that turkey leg from. But look at this thing. Look at this thing. That's a big turkey leg right there. Mmm. Turkey legs. And, of course, a big-ass bowl of fruit with a nice cluster of grapes there. And there's a fireplace in the background to show that, you know, it was warm in the winter. And to be fair, if you were sleeping in the forest and just hanging out at some local tavern during the winter, I mean, it doesn't compare to living to the sheriff's castle. Even though, yes, in the Middle Ages, castles were actually kind of dank and damp, not really great places to live in reality. But hey, even a crappy old stone castle certainly beats sleeping outside all the time. That morning, the sheriff looked about for Reynold Greenleaf. He wanted to show his noble friends the skill of his man. But Little John lay in bed, snoring till the sun was high. At last he opened his eyes, but did not move to rise. He lay still, smelling the first days of spring, thinking how sweet everything was this fair morning. Just then he heard, faint and far away, a distant bugle note sounding thin and clear. He suddenly thought of Robin and Will Stutely, whom he loved better than anyone, and of young David of Doncaster, whom he had trained so well in all sports. A great bitter longing for them all came over him, so that his eyes were filled with tears. Oh, here's a picture of Little John thinking about his friends as he laid in bed. And the three guys in his thoughts there are probably the three guys, you know, Will Stutely, Robin Hood, and David of Doncaster. I will go back to my dear friends and never leave them until life leaves my lips, he cried, leaping from bed. When he came downstairs, he saw the steward, a large fat man, standing near the pantry door with a huge bundle of keys. Now the steward hated Little John because the sheriff liked him so well, so he locked the pantry and refused to give Little John anything to eat. He grabbed Little John from behind and began to beat him with the keys. And you can see that right here. There's the steward, this fat guy right there. And he throws John against the wall and starts hitting him with the keys. Clearly not a nice guy. And why you should not be envious of other people, because it will make you into a total douche. Like this guy. So don't do that. Be nice. After all, as you're going to see, it's going to backfire on this guy pretty quickly. Little John threw the steward to the floor, broke open the pantry door, and began to eat his breakfast in peace. Now the cook in the kitchen across the courtyard heard the loud talking and saw Little John throw the steward down. He came running over with an iron bar in his hands. The steward talked the cook into fighting for him, saying he would pay him 10 shillings to teach Little John a lesson. On a side note, 10 shillings is actually not very much. So this steward is clearly not, like, he's such a jerk. First, he tries to stop Little John from eating and beats him with the key. Then he decides, hey, why don't you teach Little John a lesson? I'll give you like $1. Not very much, basically. Like, 10 shillings is not very much. And so he's like, yeah, I'll give you this small amount of money to fight this guy. It's kind of funny. When the cook agreed, I don't know why he would, the steward crawled away, expecting a might sword fight to begin. But no, for Little John called, "Hold, good cook, a mighty feast is here. I think we should enjoy it before we fight. What do you say?" The cook stopped a moment and thought, he loved a good feasting, so he agreed. Both men laid down their swords and sat down to a large meat pie. They sat for a long time, eating and singing. After several merry hours had passed, the cook said, "It's late. I have my cooking to do before the sheriff returns. Let us go and settle this brave fight." So without waiting, they drew their swords. Sparks flew at each other. They fought up and down the hall for an hour or more. Each thought the other a brave swordsman. At last Little John cried, "Stop! You are the very best swordsman I have ever met. Would you go with me to Sherwood and join with Robin Hood's band? For I am Little John." The cook seemed lost in amazement. And then he said, I will go with you, and gladly." So off they went, plunging into the woods until they came to the greenwood tree where Robin Hood and 60 men sat on the fresh green grass. Robin and his men leapt to their feet. "Welcome, Little John, welcome!" cried Robin. Oh, here's a picture of Little John and the cook. They're fighting with swords. It's funny that the cook is still wearing his apron while they're fighting. But, I don't know, I just thought that detail was a little bit funny. And of course, Little John admires this guy for being like a super good swordsman. Which begs the question, why isn't this guy, out with the sheriff? Well, maybe because you don't need a swordsman for hunting. But like, why is he the cook? Why is he not like a personal bodyguard if he's apparently such a good sword fighter? But, I mean, to be fair, in that time period, everybody had to know how to fight. And you kind of see this, and people make jokes about it, especially in like fantasy video games, where like, even like the priest class, they're all like, everybody can fight, right? Because you don't just fight to live, but you live to fight. But at the same time, that makes sense, because in that kind of time period where combat with nearby counties was actually relatively more common than you think, which is actually the real reason why the Middle Ages had such a low literacy rate, right? Because people didn't have the time to, develop reading skills, right? Only the church did. And the reason was because either you were a farmer living hand to mouth, or everybody was a soldier, right? And everybody had to do this. And even if you were a merchant trying to make your way selling meat in the marketplace, everybody still had to be a soldier, because you could be fighting anybody at any given time, right? And of course, as I mentioned earlier, there was rampant issues of like, bandits and stuff like that, especially in the traveling merchants and, castle cooks. So everybody had to know how to fight. And so you think like, well, he's just a chef, but how is this like chef at the castle like this awesome swordsman? Well, I mean, everybody kind of had to be at least pretty decent at fighting, or else you'd be dead pretty quickly. So yeah, 2 brave swordsmen, Little John and the cook. And the other funny thing is that the cook just straight up leaves his job. He's just like, yeah, I'll go to Sherwood Forest with you. I mean, to be fair, when the fat steward only pays you the equivalent of like what, a couple dollars to like, oh yeah, I want you to fight this guy that might kick your ass. Here's like a couple dollars to do it. Like, are you serious? Like, if you're gonna pay someone to do your fighting for you, you gotta pay them better than what this steward does. I mean, it's clearly this steward has got like, the sheriff of Nottingham should fire this guy because it's really this steward's fault that two of his employees basically are like, all right, I'm gone. See you later. So really, it's the steward's fault more than anything. Anyway, I'm gonna reread the scene where he returns. So they, Little John and the cook, plunging into the woods until they came to the greenwood tree, where Robin Hood and 60 men sat on the fresh green grass. And Robin and his men leaped to their feet. "Welcome, Little John, welcome!" cried Robin. "It has been a long time since we heard from you, though we all knew you lived in the castle." Then Little John told his tale, starting with an account of his bout with Eric O'Lincoln. The men shouted with laughter when their new cook was introduced. But Robin was quiet when Little John and the cook showed him the sheriff's silver they had brought along. Finally Robin spoke. "The sheriff's been punished enough. There's no need to steal his plates, too." Hearing this, Little John jumped up and ran the 5 miles to where the sheriff and his company were hunting. He told the sheriff a strange tale of deer dressed in green. Dress is oddly spelt wrong here. Dressed in green, and convinced him to come alone into the forest. When the sheriff reached the greenwood tree, he looked hard at Little John and suddenly recognized him. It took him that long? So here's a picture of the sheriff recognizing Little John, which is funny because it took him like over 6 months to do this. That's a big fail on the sheriff's part. I mean, the funny thing is that like Little John should not be a hard guy to recognize, right? Because Little John's like 7 feet tall, right? And he's this huge dude, right? Like his build alone, you should be able to recognize him. And then like, okay, only a few faces go with this guy's build, right? So it should not be difficult at all. But I mean, to be fair, the sheriff probably has a busy, stressful job and can't be bothered to remember every face that he sees, let alone all the faces of Robin Hood's men. But whatever. It's still a fail on the sheriff's part. "Beware, Little John," the sheriff cried, "for you have betrayed me." "Everything happened today because your steward starved me," cried Little John. The sheriff saw his cook and his silver, and realizing he had been tricked, he bowed his head. Robin watched him closely for several minutes. "Come, man," he finally said. "I will lead you to your party. I mean to take nothing from you today, for you came here seeking to do no harm." Then slinging the bag of silver upon his shoulder, Robin turned away. The sheriff followed him, too confused to speak. They went forward until they came within a half-mile of the spot where the sheriff's companions waited. "Test your servants well from now on, good sheriff," said Robin. And turning, he left the bewildered sheriff standing with the sack of money in his hands. And here's a picture of Robin Hood leaving the sheriff with his money. There's the poor sheriff. He's just like so confused. I realize I probably have to read like a little more than halfway just for consistency in the story. Because there's like a little mini arc that happens here. And we might as well just read this part until the end. Yeah. I'll read up to chapter 11. So we got 3 more chapters. Right now we are in chapter 9. The Tanner of Blith, or Blythe. I used to say Blythe just because of the Y rule. That the Y makes a strong I. But apparently I've been corrected. It's pronounced Blith. I mean, how do you pronounce this word, right? Tanner of Blith, apparently. And I might as well show the picture now, too. Here's a picture of Robin and his buddies. And they're just hanging out at the greenwood tree. Just having a grand old time, probably. Chilling. Sounds nice. Not practicing social distancing. But, I mean, that was the way it was back then. Just having a nice grand old time hanging out with your buddies. And not having a care in the world. Chapter 9. The Tanner of Blith. It was May, and the day was warm and humid. Most of the band were scattered through the forest on one mission or another. A few men lay lazily in the shade of the greenwood tree with Robin. There was great Little John, with limbs as tough as an oak. There was Will Stutely, whose face was as brown as a berry from the sun and wind. There was Will How the heck do you say this? Scathalok. I think that's how you say that. Scathalok, who ran as swiftly as a deer. And there was young David of Doncaster, who was almost the size of Little John, although his beard was only a fuzz. Suddenly Robin hit his knee. "We have no Lincoln green in our storeroom," he cried. "Move yourself, Little John. Go straight to Hugh Longshanks of Ancaster and tell him to send us 400 yards of cloth. Perhaps the journey will take some of the fat of lazy living at our dear sheriff's off your bones." Basically, Robin's telling him, "You've gained weight. You need to work that weight off." "I am not that fat that I could not still hold my footing on a narrow bridge against any yeoman," replied Little John. At this everyone laughed, for they all remembered the tale of how Robin and Little John had met. Robin then left them and entered the forest. He stopped at a huge rock, which had a room cut into it and a locked oaken door closing it off. This room was the hiding place for the band's money. It makes you wonder how they would have been able to cut room into this big rock. I mean, obviously they would have had ways. And it's just kind of funny to think about. Here is the big rock, and there's a little door on this rock where they keep their money. There's a picture of Little John standing there while Robin pulls out money from this money room, I guess you could say. Their treasury. Robin took out a bag of gold and gave it to Little John, who strapped it onto his broad belt. Then Little John took his 7-foot staff in his hand and set forth into the forest. He took the leafy path that led to Fawsey Way, until he came to where the paths branched. Here Little John stopped and rested his chin on his staff. One path led to Ancaster and Duty, and the other to the Blue Boar Inn. He chose the Blue Boar, thinking he would rise early the next day and make up for lost time. Now, Arthur a Bland, the tanner or leather worker of Blith, was passing through Nottingham. And on his way home, Arthur was a champion wrestler. He also had a taste for deer, and though he had no bow, he crept through the underbrush, hoping to spot a herd through the leaves. When Little John, before I continue reading, here's a picture of Little John at the little fork in the road. One is Ancaster in duty, and the other one was the Blue Boar Inn, which, as we just read, Little John chooses the Blue Boar Inn to have a drink. And maybe some good food. When Little John heard the leaves around him rustling, he thought it must be some knave after free deer meat. He stepped forward, challenging Arthur à Bland to a fight with the staff. They attacked each other with loud cries. Meanwhile, news had reached Robin that Little John was heading towards the inn instead of going straight to Ancaster. Angered by this, Robin set forth at dawn to seek Little John and tell him how he felt. Suddenly, Robin stopped along the path and listened. That is Little John's voice, and he sounds angry. Robin feared that Little John might have been attacked by the king's rangers. He forgot his own anger as he moved quickly through the thicket toward the voices. In a clearing he saw the tanner and Little John fighting like two great bulls. Little John was slower, for he was rusty from his stay at the sheriff's house. If Little John had his strength, it would have been all over for strong Arthur. But as it was, Arthur dealt a blow that put Little John flat on the ground and sent his staff flying from his hands as he fell. So here's a picture of Arthur à Bland and Little John fighting. And Arthur à Bland seems to be winning. I do not think there was a man in all Nottinghamshire who could do to me... Oh, sorry, this is Little John's voice. I thought it was Robin Hood's voice. I did not think there was a man in all Nottinghamshire who could do to me what you have done, said Little John from the ground. I too, cried Robin, bursting from the thicket and shouting with laughter. Oh man, you went over like a bottle knocked from a wall. This fellow tumbled you over with a pretty rap, as I have never seen one tumble before. Now, turning to the tanner, Robin asked, What is your name, good fellow? Men call me Arthur à Bland. Ha! I've heard your name before. You best a friend of mine at the Ely Fair last October. The townspeople call him Jock o' Nottingham, but we call him Will Scathellock. This poor fellow you knocked to the ground is considered the best fighter with the staff in all England. His name is Little John, and I am Robin Hood. And here's a picture of Robin Hood laughing at Little John on the ground. Little John rose slowly, as if his bones had been made of glass. He heard Robin ask Arthur to join his band. Arthur accepted joyfully with a snap of his fingers. He swore there would not be one deer in all Sherwood that would not know the twang of his bowstring. As for you, Little John, said Robin, you will start again for Ancaster, but we will go part way with you, for there are other inns that you know nearby. Here's a picture of Robin Hood inviting Arthur Bland to join the party, while Little John is recovering from his embarrassing defeat. Chapter 10. Will Scarlet. So the three, Robin, Little John, and Arthur Bland, traveled along the sunny road. Robin and Little John cleared up the matter of the blue boar between them. After some distance, the day being warm and the road dusty, they grew thirsty. Just beyond the hedge, they found a creek, cold as ice. Kneeling and making cups of their hands, they drank their fill, and then stretched their limbs and rested. Before I continue reading, here's a picture of Robin, or Little John and Arthur Bland resting next to the brook, and Robin is just keeping lookout. Before then, the dusty road ran across a plain. Robin kept his eyes on the road while the other two daydreamed. Suddenly, he pointed and broke the silence. Look at that gaily feathered bird. The others looked and saw a young man walking slowly down the highway. Gaily colored, he was indeed, dressed in scarlet silk and velvet, with a broad feather in his cap, and threads of gold in his leather scabbard. His hair was long and yellow, and curled upon his shoulders. Here's a picture of this guy, this gaily feathered bird. It's too bad the picture is not colored, because it probably would be pretty extravagant. You can see the cool feather in his hat, though. And he does have an interesting sword there, kind of hanging off, his belt there. But here's this gaily feathered bird, as Robin points out. By my life, cried Robin, I believe he would faint if a furious mouse crossed his path. Arthur Bland looked closely at the man and said, But see how he holds his arms? I swear there are no weak limbs in those fine clothes, only tough muscles. I think you are right, friend Arthur, said Little John. Huh, said Robin. I shall find out who he is. You two stay hidden while I go question the stranger. He stepped forth from the shade of the beech tree and stood in the middle of the road with his hands on his hips. At first the man ignored him and tried to walk by him. When Robin refused to allow him to pass and demanded to see his purse, the stranger said sadly and gently, Good friend, let me continue on in peace, for I fear I must kill you. As he said this, he drew his sword. Your sword cannot hold against my oaken staff, said Robin. Over there is an oaken thicket. You can make yourself a good staff. First the stranger eyed Robin, and then his staff. He threw aside the rose he had been carrying all this time, thrust his sword back into the scabbard, and stepped to the roadside. He found a sapling to his liking. He did not cut it, but rolled up his sleeves, placed his heel against the ground, and plucked the young tree up by the roots with one mighty pull. And here's this picture of this guy just breaking this young tree out of the ground with one mighty pull. Although the funny thing is, the guy's hat is no longer there in the picture. Oh, well, you see it on the side, but the text never said that he took the hat off. But I guess it makes sense he would take the hat off as he was prepping to pull this tree. Not wanting to ruin it or anything. When Little John and the tanner saw this, they whistled low under their breath. Whatever Robin thought, he stood his ground. Now he and the stranger in scarlet stood face to face. This way and that they fought, Robin's skill against the stranger's strength. The dust of the road rose like a cloud. The stranger beat down Robin's guard and laid him lower in the dust than he had ever fallen before. Hold! Hold! Cried Robin. I yield. Hold! Cried Little John, running from cover with the tanner at his heels. Robin lay in the road, leaning on his elbows, shaking his head. Little John could not help laugh at poor Robin, who was so sore and embarrassed that he angrily pushed away Little John's helping hand. Here's a picture of Little John and Arthur Bland watching watching Robin and the gaily colored stranger fight. Although there's this weird thing where their legs are like tied against each other. But I guess it's so that they can't break free. But the thing is, like, would Robin probably wouldn't be the one to initiate that, because if he's the weaker one, usually to understand a little bit of combat, when you lock legs like this during like a stick fight, is to make sure the other guy doesn't escape. But usually the stronger guy will do this because, I mean, that's how the stronger guy maintains his advantage. And then, when you're the stronger guy and the guy can't run and he's always within your arm reach, you just, pound the crap out of him with your superior strength. So maybe the stranger got Robin in this leg lock and then was planning to beat the crap out of him, as he does. But yeah, there's Little John and Arthur watching these two fight. Watching skill against strength. What is your name? Robin asked the stranger. My name is Gamwell, came the answer. I came to find my mother's young brother, who men call... Will Gamwell? Don't you know me, lad? Cried Robin, placing both hands upon the young man's shoulder. Look at me well. And here's that moment where Robin's like, do you know me, young man? As he puts his hands on his shoulder. Don't you know me, lad? I do believe you are my Uncle Robin, he cried, flinging his arms around Robin and kissing him upon the cheek. I left you 8 or 10 years ago, said Robin, but I certainly trained you well. I tell you, lad, you are the strongest man I've ever seen. But tell me, why have you left Sir Edward and your mother? It is a sad story, uncle, said young Gamwell. You know my father is an easy man and very slow to anger. His steward, a saucy rascal, was always speaking rudely to him. One day I couldn't stand it any longer, so I gave the steward a slap on the ear, and would you believe it, the fellow died. They say I broke his neck, so they sent me away to escape the law. I am certainly glad to see you. But a man escaping the law doesn't trip daintily along the highway sniffing a rose, said Robin. We must change your name, for warrants will be out against you. So because of your colorful clothes, you shall be called Will Scarlet. I am glad to welcome you among us, Will Scarlet, said Little John, stepping forward and offering his great palm. I am called Little John, and this is Arthur Bland, who has just joined us. Then Robin and Little John vowed that no one but the four of them would know the day. Then Robin and Little John vowed that no one but the four of them would know of the sound beatings that they had taken that day. Come, you shall go to Ancaster another time, Little John, said Robin. So turning their backs, they retraced their steps back to Sherwood. And here are the four men, as they decide to head back to Sherwood that day, and Little John can go to Ancaster another time. It's kind of hard to see the four guys, but you can differentiate them, right? With Robin and Will Scarlet in the front, and then Little John and Arthur Bland in the back. And they just start walking back home. Chapter 11. And yes, this is going to be the last chapter I read. Chapter 11. Midge, the Miller's Son. When the four men had been traveling for a long time towards Sherwood Forest, and high noon had passed, they began to get hungry. Little John gave Arthur Bland 6 pennies and sent him into a nearby inn, while he and the others stepped into the thicket to wait for the tanner's return. After a time, he came back with a large loaf of brown bread, a fresh round cheese, and a goatskin full of March beer. All that for 6 pennies, that's pretty sweet. It was divided into 4 portions, and the men silently began to eat. So here's a picture of the 4 guys eating apparently their 6-penny meal, which is like 6 copper coins basically, is what they paid for quite a bit of food, like a round of cheese. What else did they get? A loaf of brown bread and some beer. So it's pretty good for 6 pennies. I mean, you couldn't get a hamburger at McDonald's for 6 pennies nowadays, but I mean, obviously currencies change. But here are the 4 guys eating a meal for 6 pennies. At last, Will Scarlet looked at a small piece of bread he still held in his hand and said, I think I will give this to the sparrows. So he threw it from him and brushed the crumbs from his jerkin. The others had finished also, and taking a last long swallow of beer, they turned to song. Robin thought Will Scarlet's song too light for such a strong fellow. Arthur Bland had to be coaxed to sing, for he was shy. Little John sang next, and after much encouragement from the other 3, and was only halfway through his song when Robin interrupted him. Who is this fellow coming along the road? No, Little John, don't be angry. I've been watching him since you began your song. Look, I pray and see if you know him. Little John looked where Robin pointed. He is a young miller I've seen around the edge of Sherwood, explained Little John. So here's a picture of this young Miller on the road, and Robin and Little John are kind of, checking him out. He is surely not one to spoil a good song about. A strong fellow, too, said Robin. I saw him crack Ned O'Bradford's head open quite neatly about 2 weeks ago. Which begs the question, how did Robin not already recognize him if he saw him 2 weeks ago? The young miller was closer now. His clothes were dusted with flour, and over his back he carried a great sack of meal and a thick staff. His cheeks were ruddy, his hair light yellow, and he had just the beginnings of a beard on his chin. Let us have some fun with him, and pretend that we are thieves, said Robin. Then we will take him into the forest for a merry feast, and send him home with gold crowns instead of the pennies he has. What do you say, lads? All agreed but Little John, who had no desire to fight and be beaten again that day. Nevertheless, all 4 men met the miller on the road and immediately surrounded him. And here's a picture of the 4 of them surrounding this miller. What do you want with me? Cried the miller. You are on Robin Hood's ground, and if he finds you robbing an honest craftsman, he will clip your ears to your head. I fear Robin Hood no more than I fear myself, said jolly Robin. We are 4 good Christian men, who would like to help you carry part of your heavy load. Slowly and unwillingly, the miller untied the mouth of the bag, as if to give them the money hidden there. The others gathered round, while he thrust his hand into the bags and the barley flour. They wondered what he could have inside the bag. Suddenly he flung handfuls of flour into their faces, filling their eyes, noses, and mouths with it, blinding and half choking them. While all 4 stumbled about, coughing and rubbing their eyes, the miller tossed another handful and another, until their hair and beards and clothes were as white as snow. So here's a picture of the miller throwing flour into the faces of the 4 men. Although it does seem like a pretty good waste of, the flour you had been milling just earlier, probably. I mean, that's what this guy does for a living. But, I mean, you do what you have to if you have to protect yourself from thieves. So, it's he's obviously getting results. Then thwack, thwack, went the miller's staff on their backs. At last, Robin found his horn and clapped it to his lips. Will Stutely and young David of Doncaster were nearby with a party of Robin's men. When they heard the 3 blasts, they dashed forward. But what a sight they saw! 5 white men standing on a white road. That night, all was ablaze with crackling fires and feasting in the woodlands to welcome the new members to the band. For Midge, the miller's son, had also joined the band and come with them to Sherwood. Robin stood before Robin stood before the fire and announced, "Today I have gained the 3 strongest yeomen in all Nottinghamshire, and many a sore and bruised bone." The forest rang with jesting and laughter until at last each man lay down. Then silence fell on all things, and all things seemed to sleep. Here's a picture of them all just after a nice long day. Gotta lie down and get some sleep. And this is where I'm going to end the reading. I'll read the other half of the book next week. And I hope you guys will come for that, because, I mean, the other half of the book is pretty exciting. Because, of course, the first half kind of just does, like, a lot of how people join the party. Which is why I read those last 3, like, I went a little bit over halfway through the book. Because I might as well do that whole, like, Little John going to Ancaster journey. It's like a little mini arc in the middle of the book. And, of course, you meet 3 interesting characters, right? So I might as well just read them together. And then the next chapter kind of starts like a new saga, I guess you could say. But with that being said, that is all I'm going to be reading for today. I hope you guys enjoyed, some Robin Hood and some merry tales and of his merry adventures. If you want to hear the second half, tune in next week as I read the second half of Robin Hood. So for some housekeeping, before I end the stream, the next 3 days will be game streams. I'll probably do Tokyo Mirage Tuesday and Wednesday. And then Thursday will be Throwback Thursday, which means more StarCraft Brood War. And then finally, Friday will be a reading stream as I continue reading the Book of Genesis. And I should be able to finish that pretty soon, actually. Which is nice, because we'll be moving into the Christmas season pretty soon. With that being said, this is going to be the end of the stream. I hope you guys enjoyed Robin Hood and his merry adventures. And I hope to see you guys throughout this week as I continue streaming for the next 4 days. So tomorrow, tune in for some Tokyo Mirage. I will see you guys then. You guys have a good night, and God bless you.